Welcome, everybody. This is Catherine Lucas-Smith at CSED. We are so glad that we have today representation from 46 states and the District of Columbia. So this is really a nationwide interest in the Self-Employment Assistance Program. Today, our presentation is going to focus on how this relatively small program within the unemployment insurance system can be a real resource to the microenterprise field and help bring new microenterprise resources to your state. The goal today is to help you develop ideas on an advocacy strategy and to get new people inspired about how SEA can be a good resource for you and for your state. One quick technical note, right now everyone is muted, all of the participants are muted. To ask questions, you can use the questions feature of the GoToWebinar system. That vertical toolbar that you all see on your screens, there is a questions feature. The chat feature also works. Our entrepreneurship associate, Jimmy Kroll, is monitoring those features, and at the end we will use the questions that you've submitted there to moderate a session. He'll read the questions out so the entire audience can hear them, and then we will get to answering them depending on who that's for. So today you're going to hear from me and also from Martin Burrows, the Assistant Director of Oregon's Employment Department, from Teresa Lemons, the Executive Director of the Washington State Microenterprise Association, and from Claudia Veek, the CEO of the California Association for Microenterprise Opportunity, who I should also note is chairing the network of state microenterprise associations. So many of you, I'm sure, are familiar with the work that that network does and is also a fantastic resource on SEA. The presentations today will cover these 4 topics: how the Self-Employment Assistance Program helps unify microenterprise and workforce investment by advancing microenterprise as a job creation strategy. We'll go into some detail on how the program actually works and on how microenterprise practitioners and advocates can create effective partnerships both in the workforce field and with others in order to advocate effectively for SEA at the state level. The core concept of the program is that entrepreneurship is a fantastic way, and sometimes the very best way, for some laid-off workers to return to work. It delivers the type of tried-and-true training that the microenterprise field has pioneered over the past 2 decades, and delivers that to people who are coming from the traditional wage and hour employment sector who've expressed interest in starting their own businesses. It's relatively small as a portion of the overall UI system, and that's actually purposeful. It's limited so that it can be cost neutral, and that's actually a key selling point with policymakers both at the federal level and at the state level. It does not add to the cost of running your state UI system. The way that they achieve that is that workers must be likely to exhaust their benefits without finding new employment in order to be eligible. That has definitely kept the program relatively small, but as everyone here knows, there are a lot more workers in this economy who face that particular challenge. Also, as we talk about the expansion of the program, that provision only applies to one part, and we'll go into more detail on that in a few minutes. But one of the fantastic things that advocates for the program have at their disposal is that the Department of Labor has run an evaluation and found that SEA is an effective program. It works. They've also done studies on other entrepreneurship training opportunities offered through workforce investment systems and found that the workers who are most likely to get the greatest benefit and have businesses that take off and are successful are those who've been laid off from traditional jobs, who face tough prospects or a very difficult local job market, and who've expressed interest specifically in starting their own businesses. So you've got some great tools in order to make the right arguments with state policymakers about why this is a useful program. Up on the screen, you can see the states that have opted in. It's a relatively short list. The reason for that is that the process required is more difficult than most. And that's part of what this recent temporary expansion really addresses. Most UI programs, the governor of a state just has to opt in to start. It's pretty simple. But for SEA, the legislature has to pass a law authorizing the program. The governor has to sign the law to authorize the program and then take the moves to set up the program and get it running. And as I said, one of the important features of this temporary expansion is that those barriers are relaxed a little bit for the next 2 years. The extension runs through through September 2014, the end of the 2014 fiscal year. And what it does is that it offers an easy opt-in. The governor can just make a deal with the Department of Labor, a very easy agreement, to offer SEA to workers who are receiving extended benefits. Those are any benefits after the traditional 26 weeks or 6 months. And that applies if a state already offers a regular SEA program. Now, to help more states offer that program, the expansion legislation required the Department of Labor to release model legislation that state legislatures could use to just pass it as is and then be able to opt into the expansion as well. There's also $35 million in implementation grants available. It's meant to be another incentive for states to take advantage of the temporary expansion. The money can be used to help states with the marketing of the program, letting people know that it's available to them, helping their workforce centers and one-stop centers be ready to make referrals, to develop a curriculum for the training, and for a variety of other purposes. And all that states have to do to get the money is pass, if necessary, pass legislation to start a program or opt into the expansion and send an application to the Department of Labor by June 20th, 2013. It's a relatively easy grant for them to receive. The resources that we link to here both have state-by-state breakdowns of those grants. They're available, the amounts are already set, and it's available based on a state's population and their current unemployment rate. In June, CFPB published an advocacy brief, and what that provides is a nice plain language summary of the expansion and what it does. It also makes recommendations about where to start if you are interested in advocating for SEA to be brought to your state to get a program up and running, and how to make the partnerships and who to make the partnerships with to make sure that you're communicating a really strong and effective message to the state policymakers who ultimately are making the decision about whether or not this is going to be up and running in your home state. That advocacy brief is really geared towards microenterprise advocates, and we offer a number of resources specific to you as well. The DOL guidance letter, that is the document that the Department of Labor put together to share the rules for implementation of the policy expansion. And that's pretty dense, which is why our brief includes a plain language summary. But every single detail that you could possibly need to know is in that document. It's about a 30-page letter, including grant application instructions and materials. And that model legislation that I mentioned is also included in that letter, which, as many of you know, if you are asking for something from legislative offices and you can hand them exactly what you are looking for, they really find that to be helpful. So it definitely is a wonderful resource for you. So what all this adds up to for microenterprise practitioners is that this is a way to create a win-win strategy for entrepreneurship and job creation. And that means also it's a win-win strategy for entrepreneurship and microenterprise and the workforce investment field, which are more used to working kind of on separate tracks towards that larger goal of lower unemployment, increased growth, and healthy local and state economies. It also means that at the state level, policymakers are more invested in microenterprise as a key strategy for economic growth and job creation. Some states offer robust funding. That's a particular challenge right now, but over the more than 2-decade history of the program, that has been the case. And often we'll have contracts to microenterprise organizations to provide that entrepreneurship training to program participants. More common than that ideal situation is that states will have formal referral partnerships with microenterprise organizations that help make sure that clients get the best possible training that's out there, but there isn't a formal funding stream. Teresa from Washington is going to explain more about how that works in her presentation and also talk about how it really can still be a step forward even when it doesn't have that ideal, which is, of course, that there's a funding stream attached to it. The most important way that SEA is a resource for the microenterprise field is that it helps you develop a wider network of partners and a more diverse network of partners, and it proves your value to state policymakers. And it really demonstrates the power that microenterprise has, not just as an economic growth strategy, not just as a poverty alleviation strategy, and not just as a job strategy, but as something that moves forward all 3 tracks at one time. Advocating for SEA has a lot going for it, which is why we have invested the time and why we've had such an extraordinary level of interest from the field. It targets workers that states are most concerned about, the ones who may not find new paid work. Those are folks that state policymakers right now are willing to invest resources in, even in times when resources are scarce. They're also hungry for inexpensive job creation ideas, and this really fits that bill. And finally, that $35 million in federal support, yes, it's one time, but it does make a big difference when you're asking for something that does cost some money to say, well, there's a source out there, there's a grant that will provide most of what we need. There are, however, challenges, and that's something that we're going to talk a lot about throughout these presentations, particularly those from Teresa and Claudia's insights on advocating for SEA in California. The rules are complicated. There's the program that is for people in the first 26 weeks, and then there's the expansion to people receiving benefits in a longer-term way. That expansion is temporary. It's only until the end of fiscal year 2014. And as you all know, the state budget issue is a serious barrier to any new policies that require funding. But like we've said, we think that the opportunities really make this a good policy to advocate for and something that can definitely help enhance the resources that your state offers and the investment that your state government makes in the microenterprise development space. So bringing SEA home to where you live is going to require some real advocacy. And what we hope that people take away from this and from the resources that we've put together is an idea of what they need, what they have, and what they need to do to make that advocacy strategy something effective that ends in success. I have some example partners up here. Some of the most important people that you can partner with are your local one-stop centers. Having leaders within those centers who are committed to the idea of microenterprise is important. Workforce investment boards at the state and local levels, also critical resources because they are really the authorities on local economic development and job strategies. SBA, the small business development centers and women's business centers are mentioned in both the legislation and the implementation guide as resources that state employment agencies need to work with when they are implementing SEA. So working with the SBA centers in your areas can really help you make sure that you are involved in the conversation as implementation rolls out. And then I have there the Washington State Microenterprise Association's logo, since Teresa will be speaking. But I want to really highlight the role that state microenterprise associations are playing and can play here, being the voice for all of the different organizations throughout a state that are working on this. They also can really help you forge those partnerships, make the case, connect you to policymakers, and I definitely recommend for everyone who lives in a state that has a state microenterprise association that you reach out to those folks and find ways to work with them, because they are absolutely a fantastic resource for you. So now I'm going to hand it over to Martin Burrows, the Assistant Director of Business and Employment Services at Oregon's Employment Department. We've asked him to speak today because Oregon has one of the longest running and most successful SEA programs, and his insights on why why entrepreneurship is an important strategy for employment in Oregon, I think will be very valuable to those of you who are looking to reach out to your own employment and workforce agencies in states. So, Martin, take it away.
Thank you, Catherine. I'm Martin Burrows. I'm Assistant Director for Business and Employment Services with the Oregon Employment Department. As Catherine mentioned, we have been and had an association with and had the SEA program for a number of years. SEA started back in 1993. It was part of the NAFTA Act, and it was sponsored by Senator Wyden, who was an Oregon senator and still is, and the late Senator Ted Kennedy. Oregon actually began the SEA program then in 1995, and it was permanently authorized back in 1999. Since 1995, we've had approximately 5,500 Oregon unemployment insurance claimants go through the program through June of 2012. We were, until recently, one of about 8 states, as were listed earlier, who had adopted the SEA program to varying degrees. It started very small, but it has grown, and especially during the last few years during this recession, it's become a really viable option for a lot of claimants where they had a lot fewer choices for employment than they had in previous years. So why are we interested in SEA, and why do we think it's a good choice for Oregon? Well, and from our point of view, from the Oregon Employment Department's point of view, we see this primarily as a valuable reemployment option. It's another way for claimants to get off unemployment insurance and get back to work. It's not for everybody, but it's for those that have viable plans and direction to get into self-employment and something that will work. And not only is it viable and valuable for those claimants that opt to do it, but if successful, it provides other opportunities for other people in the future as well, because we have seen that a lot of these claimants who start businesses through this program, eventually, if they're successful, get to the point where they can hire additional people as well. So, who is eligible? Right now, currently, regular benefit claimants, so that means people in their initial claim, which is 26 weeks, which was mentioned. One of the drawbacks of the program that we've seen is that 26 weeks is usually not enough time to really create a self-sustaining business. So the change in the law that will allow people on emergency unemployment benefits, EUC, or other extended benefits will be really beneficial for the people in the program, because it just oftentimes takes longer than that to get a business running. Interstate claimants are also eligible. Interstate means that people that have been working in another state and had a valid claim in that state and then moved to another state. So those folks are eligible as well, as long as they have an SEA program in the state that they came from. The other thing is, as also was mentioned, is that folks that are in the SEA program have to be judged that, or deemed that they are likely to exhaust their regular unemployment benefits. And the way that is done, there's a process called worker profiling, which is all states' unemployment insurance organizations have this process. It's been around for quite a number of years, and it's designed to anticipate those claimants who are most likely to exhaust. In other words, to go through their entire claim, their entire 26 weeks without returning to work. And it's basically a logarithm that factors in a number of factors, the economic conditions at the time, the labor market conditions, and a variety of different factors, and it gives them a score as being likely to exhaust or not likely to exhaust. And so they have to be judged likely to exhaust to be eligible for this program. However, the score can be determined by the state, and we've adjusted our score several times during this program because you're allowed to have up to 5% of your total claimant population in this program. And especially during the last few years, that's a large number of people, and we've never even gotten close to reaching that number. So we've tried to adjust the profiling score so that we would get more and more people. And now we do that every year. Currently, we use a score that is determined to be just over 50% of the claimants most recently completed benefit year actually exhaust their UI benefits. So we can say that they are more likely to exhaust their benefits. The reason for that is because, as was stated, this has to be cost neutral to the UI, to our UI trust fund. Can't cost more than what would normally be given to people on unemployment benefits. So if somebody's going to likely to exhaust their benefits, then they would use their entire 26 weeks. The SEA program is for 26 weeks, so therefore it would be cost neutral. So the next slide, please. We want to ensure that, or do everything that we can to, before we accept somebody into this program, that they will be successful. So first of all, we want to make sure that the business that they're planning to create is determined feasible, and our staff do that. We used to do that through the Oregon Small Business Development Center. We would actually refer them on to them, and they would make that determination. But in the last few years, their funding has decreased so much that they were finding it difficult to keep up with that flow of customers. So they developed a worksheet and a scoring matrix for us to use, and so our staff actually do that determination, but it's based on the work and the work processes that the SBA gave us to use. They complete a fairly extensive business feasibility worksheet as part of their application. It asks them a significant amount of information about their business ideas, and it shows us how much they have thought about and researched the viability of their idea and themselves as business owners. And then we review that information, and we use a scoring matrix and give them a final score that determines whether their application is accepted into SEA or not. The majority of the applicants for this programs are accepted, though. And I think that's because up front, when we talk to applicants, even before they get to the point of completing an application, our staff talk to them about their ideas and let them know that they have to have a feasible idea and that they need to do a little research before they jump into it. And we have some partners that will help with that too as well, and I'll talk about that in a minute. They are required to submit a business plan as well, but they don't have to do that right up front. They have 30 days after they've been accepted into the program to give us a formal business plan. And then after they're been accepted, then they're in the program. The next slide shows what the benefits are to the claimant, to the customer, when they're in this program. They receive the same unemployment benefits as any regular claimant would, and that's based on, as any claimant, it's based on their earnings in a base year period. So it varies depending on how much money they've made in that period. But the fact that they're an SEA doesn't impact that amount at all. The main benefit to participants in this program is that most claimants have to be available and able and actively seeking work, which means they have to report every week and report the number of places that they've looked for work. They have to be actively engaged in looking for work. But if they're in the SEA program, they don't have to do that. They have to be involved in full-time in the establishment of their business or related self-employment activities, such as training or other activities or counseling. The other big benefit is, unlike most claimants, if they get a part-time job or they make any earnings at all while they're receiving unemployment benefits, they have to report that, and it usually reduces the amount of their weekly benefit. For SEA participants, they keep any of their earnings and don't have to deduct it from their benefits. So if they actually get to the point of making money on their business, then that's a big benefit to them. Of course, a lot of claimants don't actually get to that point until late in their claim. We encourage our claimants to use outside resources to help them as they're developing their business. We especially use the services of their local small business development centers, and they do all they can to help with that. We even, for those claimants, those that are denied entrance into the SEA program, we advise them to go to the small business development centers as well, so that they can work on their idea and maybe resubmit it if they want to. And we also have some microenterprise resources in Oregon. Workshops are offered to any of our customers in some areas of the state who are interested in starting their own businesses. Some of them are presented by the small business development centers, and some of them are presented by an organization called Merit, Microenterprise Resources, Initiatives, and Training. It's not in all areas of the state, but it's in the Willamette Valley particularly. Their workshops are open to anyone, and they call them Start Your Own Business, and it's described as an orientation, first step for those interested in starting their own business. So people that are express an interest in the SEA program here in Oregon, we often refer them, if it's available, to one of these training sessions. It's a really good start for them, and they do a really good job of telling them what it's really like to have a business, and gives them the expectations. A lot of people just don't have a realistic idea of what it takes to start a business, and I think they do a good job of letting people know that it's hard work and it takes a lot of time and good ideas, but that it's possible. So I think those workshops last 1 or 2 hours usually, and in addition to, and on the next slide, in addition to those resources, we have WIA resources in Oregon, of course, Workforce Investment Act. In Oregon, all of our claimants are considered dislocated workers. It's just the decisions our state workforce board made during this economics conditions that if you're a claimant, you are dislocated. So that means that they're all eligible for WIA training services. And in Oregon, in most areas, in our one-stop centers, our employment services and our WIA services are all co-located and integrated. So it's very easy for customers, SEA customers and others, to get those WIA training resources that may be available in those local areas as well. Next slide, please. So as you can see, as I said, SEA started has been a pretty small program for us. I've had a kind of, in the early years, just a handful of people participating. In this graph, the light blue are the numbers of people that have applied, and the dark blue are the ones that were actually accepted into the program. And back in 2005, it was less than 100 But as you can see, during the height of this recession, it really became a much more popular program. And we were pushing over 800 or so in 2009. And if you look at the end of the chart, 2012, those two bars there are only for the first 2 quarters of this year. We have, as I mentioned, we've reviewed our scoring on the worker profiling score, which lets us know those folks that are likely to exhaust, and we've changed it so that we think there will be quite a few more people eligible. So as you can see, half the year about equals what we did last year. So we're expecting that to be probably about double what it is showing there. So it's still a popular program, and still a lot of interest in it. And like I say, during a recessionary period like we're in now, it's really a viable option for a lot of people. Next slide, please. So what happens to all these people? First of all, it's a little difficult sometimes to follow up on these folks because just because once they've established a business, once they're not on a claim anymore, it's hard. We don't necessarily have a way to follow up with them. But we've tried in several different times to do that. What we've been able to find out is between 2005 and 2011, we had a little over 1,700 claimants enrolled in that program. Based on our UI tax database, which we have access to, we can compare the Social Security numbers of those people that were in the program with the people with tax numbers of people and of Social Security numbers of business owners who are now paying taxes. And so from that review, we found 416 of those people, that's the 1,700, were matched with current business owners. So that shows that they really did get out there and establish a business and are still in it. We also did a survey in 2011 of our previous customers. We sent out a survey to over almost 1,700 former participants. And as with all surveys, you don't always get a huge response to those, but we got close to 373 participants responded, which was about a 22% response rate. Out of those, 261 had launched their business. 53 of them had one or more full-time employees, 28 reported one or more part-time employees, and 29 reported occasional employees. The next slide, though, shows kind of the economic impact of that. Out of the 17 that had employees estimated at above $100,000 annual payroll, 10 of those were $100,000 to $199,000, 6 were $200,000 to $599,000, and 1 was over $1 million, $1.4 million. So that's a significant impact to the economy when you've got folks out like that are actually hiring that number of people and contributing that amount of money to the overall economic health of the state. So, and another thing we found from the survey that respondents were uniformly grateful for the program. They really appreciated it. Almost 100% of them felt it was a good program, felt they got a lot out of it, even some of those that weren't successful in the long run. Our challenges here in Oregon is a lack of funds for entrepreneurial training. We don't have as much of it as we'd like, and it would be helpful for us to have more, and it would be helpful to the claimants that are in the SEA program to help them, and probably we would have more successful claimants with more entrepreneurial training available. And it's not we do have entrepreneurial training available in some areas, but it's not available in all areas of our state. The worker profiling process that I talked about is not necessarily doesn't necessarily reflect the person's real ability to start or manage a business. It reflects their likelihood of exhausting all their benefits, but not necessarily their ability to manage a business. So that's a challenge. And as I mentioned, it's difficult to follow up on these on the outcomes of these as well. But, you know, it's a challenge that we've overcome to a certain degree. I think that pretty well concludes my part of this. There's some contact, my name and number, and our SEA coordinator are always available to answer questions if you have any. Thank you.
Thank you, Martin. We're going to hand it off now to Teresa Lemons, and she's going to tell us a little bit about her experience leading the Washington State Microenterprise Association in advocating to make SEA a permanent program in Washington State. Take it away, Teresa.
Thank you, Catherine. Good afternoon. As stated, we are a state microenterprise association. We're an association of practitioners and stakeholders formalized in 2005. Our legislative and policy efforts started shortly thereafter, so we came out the gate running on policy. So I'd like to share with you some of our strategies and our journey. Public education and advocacy is a priority for our association, and as such, convening the voice is very important. Stakeholder and practitioner support, building the strategy and the message to approach legislators and supporters. Public awareness and education is also very important. As a new organization, we recognize that microenterprise and self-employment were not on the radar as much as we felt they should be. So the core education of what microenterprise development is and why it is an important tool to moving people out of poverty and creating economic opportunity. We created talking points on practice, impact, shared data, outcomes, and trends. And our primary goal in the beginning was for us to just simply gain exposure and connectivity regarding our role along the economic development continuum. And that positioning is also very important, how that work differs from the business assistance activity that others may be more familiar with. Oftentimes, it's small business development centers, small business association, economic development councils that are the go-to. And so the work of the microenterprise field, we had to do a lot of education, identifying the service to underserved populations and the concern about access to capital and being a player in that continuum. Coordination is also very important. In fact, naming microenterprise development and small business assistance in language, I can't stress enough how important that legislative language is and critical to gaining traction. Specifically, naming organizations and the type of services that are eligible parts of any initiative affects the implementation. Oftentimes, legislative intent can be lost once implementation takes effect. And then finding the champions. We were fortunate enough to have a key legislator who was knowledgeable about entrepreneurial development services and the impacts of one of our microenterprise development organizations. She actually prompted the policy discussion, and as we met with and educated other legislators, we found additional champions on both sides of the aisle easily. Jobs and unemployment are priority issues for both. Next slide. So legislative activity has been a multi-year discipline for us. We've never taken our eye off of the policy activity. Again, in 2005, we initiated some of this with, again, our goal being education, positioning, and visibility. By 2007, things had changed a little bit. Across the country, budgets were shrinking. Legislative bodies were asking for bills that didn't have money, looking for solutions with existing resources. And so we came to the legislature with the message that unemployment is rising. This self-employment assistance program is a federally supported and allowable activity under WEA. Other states have done this successfully, and individuals need options. So as a result, the self-employment assistance program was enacted, And we also passed some legislation that supported entrepreneurial training through the Workforce Investment Act system. Unfortunately, no dollars were created to support the activity other than administrative funding to change the systems necessary to create the program through the Employment Security Department. But though no funding was successfully passed, we did create access, and so we look at that as a huge success for helping individuals have options during a difficult economic period. And then fast forwarding to this, actually just this year, we had another bit of a crisis on our hands. The legislation that was passed in 2007 actually had a sunset clause in it. And then after experiencing the program for a couple of years, we recognized that there were some areas of improvement. So back to the legislature, policy efforts. Our message was we've got a successful program implemented. Unfortunately, employment is rising and continuing to rise. Jobs, self-employment is a job, especially in rural communities where there's greater percentage of micro-enterprise and self-employment and a greater percentage of unemployment. We also messaged that the coordination and access was a challenge for both programs and participants, that training wasn't necessarily supported for entrepreneurial development as anticipated through some of our state agencies. In fact, very few of our workforce development partners had been supporting entrepreneurial training for their clients. And also coordinating and increasing the microenterprise development provider engagement. Funding was continuing to be problematic. Existing training providers were continuing to subsidize, for a lack of better word, the entrepreneurial training activity for their clients. So as a result, we were able to remove the sunset clause. We also were able to remove what had been put in place, a no-compete order, basically requiring that any participant who wanted to enroll in the SEAP program would have to sign a no-compete agreement with their former employer, which created some obstacles and turned out to be not a big issue. It also required the organizations via Employment Security to identify funding equal to the demand. So funding for entrepreneurial training that equaled the demand in their region. It had asked for an increase in microenterprise development training providers and to streamline the contracting process. All of this isn't without layers, and so just a word of encouragement that it takes all players at all levels to be part of the success of passing legislation and working cooperatively with partners. So we worked at the stakeholder advocate level, at the agency level, with our legislature and in our governor's office, both proponents and opponents. Next slide. So not all agency management responsible for implementation of new legislation is part of or even in the know of legislative processes and policy changes at any given time. So oftentimes they are not aware of what the legislative intent is behind some of the policy activities and bill passages that affect their work. So we consider education that has to continue and involvement that is needed to ensure proper application of intent. Here again, language matters. It's important to include business assistance organizations, all of those organizations that provide that sort of service, so that we can have an inclusive approach and have a rich array of resources that are working in this field. Working with the state agencies, we worked with Employment Security and Workforce Development. The rulemaking process is important, how the legislation turns into a program, how they detail it, how they create the process, how the client or claimant protocols work and the agency protocols work, and how those state requirements and processes mesh with federal requirements and processes. We also work very hard to collaborate with the agencies and the practitioners, how programs are implemented, sharing knowledge of the service providers with the local workforce development councils. Here in our state, and I assume in many others, the actual application of programs and decisions about how programs are conducted oftentimes lies in the hands of the local Workforce Development Council at their leadership level. And so it's very important that local organizations and service providers are coordinating and collaborating with their local workforce councils. Public education and awareness, again, became an important element, awareness of the Self-Employment Assistance Program, both at the client level and at the agency level. The staff at the one-stop shop, for example, need to be aware of what this program is. We found that after a year, 2 years into it, there were still organizations and individuals who had really no clear understanding of how the program worked, how an individual would be eligible for participation, what the processes were, what resources were available for them to work with. Currently, our Employment Security Office and our Workforce Development Centers are really drilling down to they're creating a manual, they're providing training for frontline staff, and they're meeting with directors to resolve some of those issues. Funding constraints are still a problem. We have no new dollars for training and technical assistance. Capacity is still a challenge. Most self-employment clients, as mentioned, are coming into services with no form of payment. Again, though, access was important. The service providers are still funding the bulk of the activities that their clients are engaged in. There's also barriers with the performance payments with the Workforce Development Councils, and I believe Claudia and others may talk on this. Federal regulations on job placement and performance still are not compatible with self-employment activity and outcomes, which mean most councils have not invested in this work as it's not going to result in a payment credit for them. And we're hoping that this new legislation will move some of these issues along. So historically, we've had some buy-in challenges, a lack of support that self-employment is a job. It's been a problem. We've continued ongoing education. We're chipping away at that. The current economic conditions help to give the issue more weight and consideration, so we are seeing that improve along with the partnership and the work that our local state agencies are doing. Next slide. So legislation was necessary this year to get some of our agencies to be a little bit more serious about supporting the entrepreneurial training and self-employment activities, and we're really seeing that as a positive movement. As mentioned, they're creating online tools, doing staff training, improving process internally as well as with clients, the notification process improvements with clients. It's really beginning to take shape. We also discussed the legislation has identified that the agencies must find funding mechanisms to support entrepreneurial training based on demand. That again is it's promising, but it's somewhat problematic. Each of those local workforce councils is to define demand and what that means and what their formula is for determining demand. And that should probably be more standardized based on the entrepreneurial activity in a region and not necessarily the client activity of the Self-Employment Assistance Program. Being that that is a new program, it's also limited eligibility. It doesn't necessarily serve as a baseline for the entrepreneurial climate for a community. Also hopeful in this legislation is that microenterprise development organizations have an increased role as certified training providers and are able to access a fee-for-service for funding training via the voucher system. Again, an eligible client who has created an individual development plan and had that approved for training can secure dollars and go to a local community college, a certified training provider, apply that to entrepreneurial training. So our organizations are moving to become eligible certified training providers so they can actually be in a position to have a fee-for-service opportunity. This is a newer development, so I don't have a lot to report on that at this time. So what we've learned is that we need a willingness to compromise for progress. We have to take a look at what our goals are. Are we looking at creating access? Are we looking for funding? Is it collaboration or systems improvements? Depending on our successes, you know, sometimes we can ask for it all, but we don't always get to have it all. And so we found that we've had to compromise on a number of things over the years, and taking those small steps forward. If access is the starting point, then access it is, and we move on the next year to improve our policy position as we go along. Surprises, we learned in our first go-round that the Employment Security Division had no idea that the initial bills that we passed were even being heard and processed. And to be honest, it didn't set a good stage for a positive relationship out the gate. So the lesson learned is to work with all parties, to be upfront, forward, and inclusive in what you are doing, and gain support at all levels. Funding doesn't always follow policy, as I've mentioned. Again, the legislators are looking for solutions that don't necessarily cost money and using existing resources. Progress is progress, and we need to celebrate our successes and work toward greater capacity. And to end, I guess what I'd like to say is that I think this is an excellent opportunity. This new federal bill is a great tool to start the conversation flowing and to see some policy movement in other states. It comes with money, and money talks, and I'm sure you'll all have great success in moving your programs forward. And there's also some of my contact information for questions.
Thank you so much, Teresa. We're running a little bit long, but I do want to hand it over now to Claudia Wieck, who can talk about the work that she's doing right now in California. And after that, we will do a Q&A session that we may run a few minutes after the intended 4:30 end time. Claudia?
Yes, hi. Thanks, everybody. I was asked to join you as a kind of discussant and also to give you a little case study on our experience, particularly of the obstacles in California. So much of what Teresa said is so true, and just also to back up, Cameo is, like Teresa's Washington network, we're the statewide microenterprise and microlending network in California. We have 85 members, the majority of which do provide training and business assistance, and some of those are, we have about 8 SBDCs and all the women's business centers in our network. So give you a sense. And our folks worked with roughly 22 to 25,000 businesses last year and can track the job creation too. So we have that data, and that data is really critically important to making your case to your state. In our case, it's called the State Employment Development Department, and I'm going to call it EDD. So that's the acronym for the State Employment Office. I've had the benefit of talking with Oregon quite a bit, and they are really a great role model, and they have a lot of materials and processes which many of us can learn from. Since we don't have a lot of time, what I was going to just talk about is our experience in California, both the pros and the, let's put it this way, the barriers to just getting started. Partly the barriers, our state is so big, it should be like 3 unemployment insurance benefit regions instead of one. So there are over 700,000 long-term unemployed, and the SEA is capped at 1%, which would be roughly 20,000 people in California, which is a lot of people, but compared to 700,000, it doesn't seem like very many. So also in the middle class tax legislation that the SEA was included in, has a lot of regulations for EDDs that make it very burdensome to bring in a new program. So we're very sympathetic to their situation, and we are trying to work together to see what can happen. At this time, though, our EDD feels that the costs, in other words, the funding that's available through the Department of Labor out of that $35 million, we would qualify for roughly $5.3 million. They don't feel that that's enough funding. We disagree on that, so we need to make that case more strongly. The integration of the SEA within their eligibility process and their IT system is another barrier. And there's not a big buy-in right now for the value of self-employment. There is philosophically, to a certain extent, a buy-in, but then when it comes to actually commitment, doing it, there is not a lot of buy-in from the state offices. The governor's office is very much influenced by the state office, and so it's very important that we have the EDD support if we're going to go forward. This has been reinforced by the Department of Labor, saying you have to have a champion within that state employment department. However, we do have enthusiastic support and bipartisan support from our state legislators. So that's a very good thing, and we are working with them to bring a bill starting in January that would enable the state to apply for these funds and create a program. We also have strong support from our state workforce association, which represents, it's like the Cameo network for WIBs and one-stops, and that has been a big change from last year. Their director, who has worked in the workforce system for many, many years, she's become a great advocate and is working with us to help influence the hearts and minds. So we are right now in the middle of, Heidi Pickman, our communications director, myself, are beginning to initiate a petition, an online petition like a change.org, also a media strategy to build support for an SEA in our state to show that there is a huge demand, and as Teresa mentioned, that's very important to show the demand, and to get people's comments who have been laid off who wish to start small businesses. We actually have people calling us who are aware of the federal legislation. We've had 3 or 4 calls of people asking if they can do this in California. So let's see. One of the other groups that we've had less than enthusiastic support from, maybe that's a nice euphemism, is the California Chamber of Commerce. Now, interestingly, the Oregon Chamber is very supportive of the SEA program, and I don't know if they had to come around to that or if it was just a natural outgrowth of the program being around for a while. Our state, and this may be true for some other states, feels that, and I'm going to say a quote, they feel that the Unemployment Insurance Trust Fund, which is contributed to by the large employers that make up the chamber, that this fund should not provide a quote-unquote free ride to would-be entrepreneurs who could then compete with members of the chamber. So that non-compete issue is an interesting one, and I think Oregon has definitely found that not to be an issue at all. People who have been laid off know whether the company that laid them off is going to be sustainable and where they would even want to compete with them. Sometimes there has been a niche uncovered that they do go into, but from what I've learned from talking with folks in Oregon is that the competition issue is just a non-starter. Which is interesting because Pete's Coffee is on the board of our California chamber, and I don't think Pete's Coffee is going to be worried about some little coffee bar that's going to open across the street, but that's supposed to help build it'll be more business for everybody. That's my position. The performance measures, I just wanted to do a really quick overview on that. In talking with Gay Gilbert at the Department of Labor, who's in charge of the SEA program, the issue of the WIA performance measures, which would kick in once you try to get more entrepreneurial training funded or linked in, that there's more flexibility in interpreting those measures. States can renegotiate their targets with Department of Labor and also due to the small number of those that participate in SEA, it really isn't seen as a big problem. So that's something that is an opening for all of us because it's been a major barrier, as Teresa mentioned, to getting training funded through the WIB system. WIBs can't meet their placement targets anyway, at least in California, where we have high and persistent unemployment. Unemployment is close to 12%, and in communities of color, it's closer to 30%. So the lack of performance measures within WIA for self-employment is not, or the lack of specificity, I think is better to put it that way, is not a big issue any longer. But you do have, if you're going to work with your WIA, your WIB system, you do need to identify and break that out, and Cameo has specific performance measures on our website. If you go to microbiz, microbiz.org, you will, and you find the WIB page, the WIB demonstration project, you'll find the performance measures on there. Let's see, there was one other thing, but I think that's about it for now. I can be around for maybe one question, but I do need to leave for another board meeting. Oh, I know what it was. It's really important for the state microenterprise networks, or there needs to be one point of contact in your state to the employment department or to to the people who have to make this decision. So if you don't have an SMA, I would recommend creating a task force for SEA, and you could connect to our SMA network. I'm the chair, so I say it's okay. And we can provide you with support and information on a regular basis. This webinar was cooked up through our network of people who work together on this issue, and through AEO and CFED. We're all working together on this, so really invite you to connect with the SMA network. And again, you can contact me through Catherine Lucas-Smith at CFED, and she can send you everybody's contact information on that. So that's about all that I have to share at this point.
Thank you so much, Claudia. That was a really wonderful overview of all of the different strategies that states can use to get at this from different angles. We are running a little over time, but I'm going to start us off on the Q&A with one that applies to you, and then if you have to hop off to head to your meeting, absolutely feel free. And we'll do a couple of questions, but if we don't get to yours, since we are already a little over time, please just shoot me an email. My email information was included with the RSVP for the webinar, so you've all got it. And I will do my best to make sure that you get an answer from me or from someone else. So I'm going to hand it over now to Jimmy with the Q&A.
Hi, everyone. So we got quite a few questions in. What struck me was the number of questions about the role that credit plays in the implementation of programs. So Claudia, could you address how capital was identified to help participants start their small businesses, and if partnerships with microlenders or financial institutions are one way to do that?
That's a great question, and it's not one that has really been, I think, well defined in this field. Normally, a person in the SEA program should get connected through like a list of resources to all of the resources in their state, which include microlending. Right now, capital is not part of the program. It needs to be sought out as part of the business planning process. The SBDCs have been named as sort of a key point for the business planning process. We certainly are planning to have all of our lenders, and we have about 28 lenders, most of whom do loans under $50,000 as part of the resource lists. Teresa mentioned, and I want to emphasize, training your one-stops and career centers is absolutely essential. That's where unemployed people go. Whether you actually get an SEA program or not, you need to train the staff people at those centers to be able to do some assessment on business readiness. And at that point, you can provide the resources for both the capital and the entrepreneurship training.
And Teresa, can you address this question?
So the connection between microfinance or microlending resources and self-employment assistance program is the question, correct?
Yes.
Okay. We don't have a correlation in policy or in agency practice necessarily between those two activities. However, many of our organizations that are training, certified training providers also offer either their own in-house small business loan programs and or coordinate with other resources. And certainly because their services are much more comprehensive, they have those resources available and can direct their participants to credit resources. One of the other things that's part of the entrepreneurial training is covering the whole financial projections and financial preparedness and preparing individuals to be borrowers should they deem that money is necessary.
Thanks, Teresa. The next question I have is for Martin. How have you been able to get the Department of Labor's approval to relax the profile threshold?
Well, it's been our experience with the Department of Labor that their concern is that the threshold enables people that are in the program that are likely to exhaust. That's their criteria. They don't really they're not really tied into a specific score. As long as you can demonstrate that score will screen out those people who might not be likely to exhaust. And we've done that, and we calculate it every year now. And as I mentioned, what we do is we look at all of the claimants, the entire universe of them here in Oregon. We look at what their scores are, and then we determine that score that is 51% of those people are going to exhaust their claim, and then that's the score we use for that year. And so far they've had no problem with that at all.
Great, thanks, Martin. I have a question here for Teresa. Were any federal grant funds awarded to agencies or organizations that oversaw entrepreneurship training efforts?
So I'm going to take that out of the context of the policy. There are federal grant dollars available through Small Business Administration and other sources, USDA, for example, that contribute to entrepreneurial development in communities. So from that perspective, on a case-by-case individual organization basis, there are organizations that receive federal dollars. It's not, I'm not aware of any federal dollars that have come in to support a state-run program per se through a state agency at this time.
Thanks, Teresa. So we have time for just one more question, and I'm going to direct this to Catherine. Is there a central repository of data on the effectiveness of microenterprise efforts?
Thanks, Jimmy. Yes, there is. Many of you know about the work of the field program at the Aspen Institute. Their website, which I believe is fieldus.org, is definitely the #1 place to find information about the microenterprise development industry in the United States. And that includes information about jobs created through microenterprise training, the impact that training has on number of businesses started and business earnings. And I should say that right now the 2012 microenterprise census that the field program operates is open. So if you're on the call and you offer microenterprise training services to clients and you have not yet completed the survey, I really encourage you to do so, because it is definitely the most important and robust source of data that is out there on how these programs are changing communities and helping people start new businesses and succeed in that effort. So we're going to wrap it up here. Thank you so much to our presenters, Martin, Teresa, and Claudia, and also to all of you who are on the call. If you had a question that we didn't get to answer, please do contact me, and I'll make sure that we get back to you. And have a nice afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.